Hey guys, welcome to my channel, and this is actually my very first ever YouTube video. For this video, we will be having our budget gaming PC build. I will give some info and some important pointers about building a budget gaming PC. So let's get into it. So first up, we'll be going for our motherboard, and for this build we'll be using the Gigabyte GA A320M S2H. Well, this board has AM4 CPU socket, which supports AMD Gen 1, Gen 2, and Gen 3 for Ryzen APUs, Athlon with Radeon Vega 8 graphics, and Athlon X4 processors. It has two ROM sockets for DDR4 DIMMs, and it has a dual channel architecture that supports up to 64 GB of system memory. Each socket has 32 gigabytes supported. It also has a maximum shared memory of up to 2 gig, but the actual support may vary on the CPU. That part is very important if your build doesn't have a graphics card, because your system memory may actually be used for your graphics memory, but we'll talk more about that later. This board has 4 SATA 3.0 storage ports, and the best thing about this board is that this board is one of the cheapest boards available in the market that already have M.2 storage connector that supports both SATA mode and PCIe mode, running on Gen 3 with 4 lanes, which means it's NVMe compatible for faster storage speed. So for those of you who's asking what is SATA mode and PCIe mode for M.2 and does it have any significance for us to know about this? Well, definitely yes. And we will discuss more of that later. So for the back panel connectors, we have one PS2 keyboard ports, one for the mouse, and it's also PS2. We have one D-sub port, DVI-D port, one HDMI port, 4 USB 3.1 gen, and 2 USB 2.0 ports. We also have RJ45 port and 3 audio jacks for line in, line out, and mic. For our CPU, we have the AMD's Ryzen 3 2200G APU. This CPU has 4 threads and 4 cores that clocks 3.5 GHz each, with maximum overclock speed of up to 3.7 GHz. It also has a built-in 8-core GPU with Radeon Graphics Vega 8 running on 1100 MHz. AMD called it Accelerated Processing Unit, or simply APU, because it's a 2-in-1 processing unit. This means that even without having a separate graphics card in your build, you can still have a better gaming experience. This is best for casual gamers that can't afford to have a separate graphics card yet. This CPU supports also PCIe 3.0 by 8 lanes. So next up, we have our memory stick, the Kingston HX426C16FB3 DIMM. It's a DDR4 memory stick running on 2666 MHz with 8 GB of memory capacity. For those of you who are confused why there are so many names associated with this thing like DIMMs, RAMs, DDR4 memory stick, well, it's this. RAM or random access memory is a general term for this kind of memory. It's a volatile memory, which means it doesn't have the ability to retain any stored data after cutting off the power, and all the data will be erased after turning it off. DIMM or DIMM, or which means dual inline memory module, is simply a type of RAM. It's a type of RAM that latest PCs are using right now for its high memory clock rate. DDR or DDR SDRAM, which means double data rate synchronous dynamic random access memory, is a class of DIMM. And the number after it, like DDR4, simply means the version or the generation. Note that they are not backward compatible to each other. It means you cannot put DDR1 DIMM to a DDR2 memory slot and vice versa. So technically DIMM, RAM, DDR are just the same. Now, going back to our build. Remember earlier when I said that it is important to know if your board has a dual channel architecture? It's because since we don't have a separate graphics card for our build, the system will need to allocate a dedicated storage from our RAM for additional storage that our built-in CPU or GPU can use. This means that both the CPU and GPU needs to access the RAM at the same time. This can create data traffic if your board has single channel architecture only, or you only have one DIMM. Well, dual channel, for example, this board has two memory sockets, means that each socket has its own separate connection directly to the CPU. That also means the CPU and GPU can now use either one of the connection to access the RAM, which eliminates the data traffic. The only downside of this is that you need to have at least two DIMMs with the same clock rate and preferably with the same storage capacity. The maximum memory or shared memory that can be allocated to your GPU depends on your board. As mentioned earlier, this board has a maximum of 2 gigs of shared memory. So, for our storage drive, we have the Kingston SA2000M8 NVMe M.2 with 250 gigabytes of memory capacity. So earlier I mentioned things like M.2 SATA mode and M.2 PCIe mode, and the significance for us to know about this thing. It's because there is a huge difference between M.2 SATA mode and M.2 PCIe mode in terms of storage speed. It doesn't mean that M.2 drives is faster than the ones with SATA drives. It actually depends on the type of the protocol they are using. SATA drives that supports SATA 3.0 is actually as fast as M.2 drives on SATA mode can go. They have the same speed of up to 600 megabytes per second, since they both use the same protocol, which is the SATA protocol. PCIe, or Peripheral Components Interconnect Express, is an interface standard for connecting high-speed components. NVMe, or non-volatile memory express, is a technology used to access storage memory with a very low latency, which uses PCIe interface, and it is embedded to the drive itself. The speed of NVMe drives depends on the PCIe generation multiplied to the number of lanes it is using. So for example, this board has PCIe Gen 3, which has the storage speed of 985 megabytes, then multiply it to the lane that it is currently using, which for this board it has 4 lanes, for a total of 3.94 gigabytes per second of storage speed. See the difference? 600 megabytes versus 3.94 gigabytes. That's a huge difference. That's why it is important for you to know about M.2 SATA mode and M.2 PCIe mode. Are they backwards compatible? Well, since they are using the same form factor, which is M.2, then they can be backwards compatible, but it depends to your board if it supports both or only one mode. So for our CPU cooler, we'll be using the AMD stock cooler. This cooler is actually came with the Ryzen CPU we have. You noticed earlier. So basically we need to unscrew this part here to accommodate the CPU cooler screws. So we will need a screwdriver here. We'll make sure we do it gently in order for us not to damage any capacitors on the board. That's the last thing we wanted to do. We don't want to damage anything on this board, so let's do it gently like this. And there we go. Okay, let's see. Okay, there goes the back panel. Let me show you the back panel. This is actually your back plate metal panel. Make sure to put it on the right place. Put the holes on the correct ones. And then we can now put the stock cooler for AMD. Let's making sure the power cords actually is in place the same as where we can actually connect it to the board. So in this case it's this setup, so we need to screw it. If you noticed, I only have one memory stick installed in our board, which is an irony of what I recommended earlier. It's because I am planning on buying another memory stick and a graphics card. I also plan to have a review on how single memory stick work versus having 2 memory stick with lower clock rate. For our system case, we have the Trendsonic for TH06A Red and Black Edition. This case has 3 fans and it's multicolored LED lit fans, not RGB sadly. It has a tempered glass side panel for perfect RGB fans. For those who want colorful lightings for their PC, this is perfect for you. It also supports ATX boards and PS2 power supply unit. So let's start mounting the motherboard. And the last piece for our build is the Silverstone ST50F ES230 power supply with 500 watts of power. This power supply unit is a high efficiency with 80 plus certification. This thing has a 24 pin connector for the motherboard, one 8-pin connector for the CPU, 2 PCIe 6-pin plus 2-pin connectors for PCIe expansion cards, 2 SATA connector power connectors for SATA drives, and 2 4-pin connectors for additional system fans. After doing some cable management stuff, this is what our build looks like. I used zip ties to tie the cables and put them in place. Below we have the cables for USB 3.0, the front panel wires for restore, power switch, HDD lead, and power lid. We also have the front panel USB 2.0 and the audio cables. Above we have the 24-pin connector for our motherboard and the 8-pin connector for our CPU. There's not that much of cable management needed for our build since we are using onboard storage drives and we don't also have DVD optic drives. Cable management is important not only to make your system unit looks neat, but also for good airflow inside it. And at last, this is what our system unit looks like. For Windows installation, we will cover that to our next video, so please hit the subscribe button if you want to watch it. If you find this video helpful, you can hit the like button and share this video for those you think needs this. Again, thank you for watching. This is Mike. We will see you in the next video.